What's up, y'all? Did you see that last thing that just passed through the screen? Passed in front of Jupiter? I think that was a satellite. It's got to have been. That's pretty cool. Haven't caught one of those in a while. So just really first 2 minutes of the stream. I see you, Carolina. What's going on? Talking about gluten-free churros. I love me some churros. What's up, Esoteric Gold? Did you both see that? Or whoever is hanging out, is only 4 of y'all, but did you see that transit? That's really cool. It might have been the ISS, right? Or no, or maybe even Hubble. That was pretty big and it was quick. So you got a really crazy configuration of Jupiter tonight. It is 7:32 p.m. Central Florida. Beautiful skies tonight. Moon's not coming up till much later, so tonight is right on with Jupes. And are talking about some counter rotation, talking about some Dan Winter, talking about, I see Buddy. What's going on, Buddy? Love to see you. What's up, Mom and Dad? Jamming out with you, I love it. Yeah, I don't know if anybody who's just showing up, scooch back like the first minute and a half, like about a minute in, there's a satellite transit. Anyway, I'll put it in the timestamp of the archive. So yeah, I was talking a lot last night. Last night's show, 3 hours, articulated a lot of different ideas. And today I want to talk a little bit more about those same ideas, but also I happened to get an email from one of our fam, and they recommended this video, and I hadn't had a moment to really check the email till today. But I also happened to be on YouTube, and I was like, oh, what is this video? And then it's Jay Widener and Dan Winter doing a 4-way call, talking about the latest on basically, if you don't know who Jay Widener is, he's co-founder of Gaia TV. And so I watched this whole hour and a half of Dan Winter and Jay Widener talking about the current state of things. It's really fascinating. A lot of the stuff is just amazingly synchronistic. Then I came back and answered the email. Turns out the email had that exact video in it. So serendipitously or subconsciously ended up watching the exact video I needed to respond to the email. Of course, that's how it goes. I was just pulling up some labels here so we can see what the moons are. It's Ganymede on the bottom left, Callisto, Io, and Europa at the top. What's going on, Red Rum? I see you. Imagine I end up on Secure Team again. Please, I hope they don't put this video on Secure Team. Because they're going to call it some sort of like giant mothership, transits Jupiter, astronomer baffled. Easy E, what's going on? Nice to see you. So I also watched a couple of, what else did I watch? I watched a couple of videos about lightning today from Pico Hank. I know some of y'all have probably seen the channel. Pico Hank is a storm chaser and does a lot of amazing lightning stuff where he's talking about like these, what are they? They're essentially wires that move up towards the lightning strike that's coming down from the cloud. And I just learned about it like an hour ago, but very interesting about how lightning is formed, and there's incredible footage on it. And the whole time I was thinking, so interesting if this is how Earth is thinking. We're just seeing giant neural patterns with Earth basically communicating with its cloud memory and remembering things and forming things where the field of Earth is informing the way the surface of Earth looks, but Earth is also storing memories of Earth, the way Earth looks, the way Earth feels in the cloud. And lightning strikes are these neurokinetic pathways that are basically filaments. And also around the filaments, we have visible Birkeland sheaths, these counter-rotating cylinders. And then where did that take me? That took me to watching some Andrew Hall video, which is really excellent, also synchronistic and serendipitous, because I was just talking about the surface features of planets coming in and being imprints of the Birkeland current. And so Andrew Hall's thing was also talking about lightning strikes and how lightning strikes can affect the landscape and how they're giant lightning strikes, and it's just so simple. It's just right in front of us. Step leaders, yeah, thank you, buddy. So leaders, positive leaders, negative leaders, and some spikes coming out of the ground will send up a connector but won't actually connect with one of the lightning bolts, so they're failed. And it kind of, the whole idea was so recursive in terms of, you know, trial and error universes, a game of numbers, but also the connectivity of filaments. Pico Hank doesn't really talk about the fact that lightning reaches from the ground means there's some sort of interaction beforehand where the plasma filament goes into glow mode because it understands that this filament is lit up. So I've kind of changed my a few years ago I started to think about lightning as these connectors that are already connected, but then we see them in glow mode when they get excited. And in this case, it's very interesting because some of the power comes up from the bottom, and then the cloud has the most of the power, and you kind of see the two ends of this wire kind of fusing together at a certain point close to the Earth, almost like the instability where like a gravitational point would be between the ground and the ionosphere. It's really fascinating to look at that. So that plus Andrew Hall was really cool. And then this whole talk with Dan Winter and Jay Widener about, you know, the current state of things, really interesting, like how much great information there is and how brilliant he is, but also how kind of doesn't mention other things in the sphere, you know, doesn't really refer to other people doing electric universe stuff, doesn't really refer to any of the contemporaries in the space for whatever reason. So that's one slightly weird thing about Dan Winter. And then the other part is that the host never seems to pause him and try and go into certain ideas about implosion, where he says something about, what is it? The only way to get gravity is by implosion. But he says it in this way as if like we're not already achieving that. And I think maybe it's just the way he phrases it, but this idea of we send attention signals into the field, and the field is longitudinal propagational waves of potential states of reality, and when we cross these wires, we essentially create these instantiations of reality. But I think that all of reality is already operating that way. So I feel like the kind of intrigue he adds to it with his language sometimes feels a little bit out of place, because I'm like, I think he's trying to say that he's figured out how reality works, and in which case I completely think he's right about that. But then there was this part where he does mention the whole Elena Danaan thing and the Galactic Federation of Planets, but he's also talking to Jay Weidner about Gaia TV, and they're talking about the Corey Good scandal and all this stuff. So I'm just like, every time he goes to the point where they've cleared our system of Dracos and Greys, and how I just never understand like why we need aliens when it can't just be people doing it. If we understand that the tech is real, then there's no need for extraterrestrials in this story. But somehow it always kind of comes back to that, and that part of it always kind of gets me a little bit like, I don't know what to feel about it. It's hard to say, hard to prove. Astralis, what's going on? Did I say hi, Astralis? Sorry, I went off on a rambling tangent. Hope you're doing well. Namaste. Renegade, what's going on? Randy Mash. The principle of least action. Let's see. Buddy says you could think of the invisible step leader that is even in front of the lightning bolt as dark mode plasma, and the filament is probably already there, but we can only see it once it becomes arc mode. Yeah, totally. But right, like there's more clearly excitation of the entire filament of a lightning bolt coming from the cloud side versus the ground side, because I imagine that closer to the ground it becomes much more, the permissivity or magnetic permeability really impinges upon that glow mode of that end of the wire. So we see a lot more of it kind of coming down from the cloud. I mean, I know that's very simplistic understanding of it, but that's what I was thinking about the whole time. I was like, but it does actually know that there's this, the only way that it can reach upwards to connect with something is if it knows the thing is coming downwards, is my dumb understanding of it. Esoteric Gold says, in Europe, insurance companies will pay you for radon therapy spas, where you breathe in radon gas from an old uranium mine for rejuvenation processes. Could they be lying to us with the radon? So yeah, that's a good point. There's a whole thing in the Dan Winter discussion where they're talking about monotonic gold and breathing in gold dust to become immortal, and how it's so hidden and esoteric and all this stuff. But I've changed my perspective on this whole immortality survival thing, where it's like, if you only, then you will mentality. And a lot of the discussion today, I mean, Jay Weidner actually doesn't seem to, well, it's interesting. He's a little bit more grounded. I feel like Dan Winter somehow has lust, like has a lot of vigor to discover this immortality thing. And I think arguably he has, but the goal of immortality seems to defy the logic of existence, if that makes sense. So he never refers to this contrast, which Alan Watts kind of refers to, where he tries to tell you that even if you had immortality, you would still need a counterbalance. You can't even have any type of existence at all without the opposite of what you want, because the opposite of what you want is the foundation for what you want. And I guess maybe this is a dipole reality, right? Like maybe that only works in a two or trinary or binary system. And that's why we experience things as such, as a contrast. But I would say that like we don't have evidence for a deeper dimensional system that says, well, I mean, you can speculate, but we just don't have that proof. So I feel like everything is a contrast. So why even quest for immortality or to preserve this body through death when it really defies the whole purpose of living? Let's see. Buddy says, when I interview him again, I'll ask him direct questions about different people's work in the field. That's awesome. Man, that's amazing. Like, the other thing I would ask is, like I said, is he talking, when he talks about implosion and creating gravity, I imagine my take on it is that anytime you instantiate anything, literally when you send a beam of energy from your eyes, a beam of photons or a beam of oscillating frequencies along a current to an object and it resonates with the field, that instantiation, that interferometry literally also creates gravity, a time bubble, a resonance, like Rupert Sheldrake's kind of cymatic frequencies, just invisible tiny knots of oscillating information. And some of them become, the more you focus on it, the more attention or tension or torque you give it, the stronger the idea can become. And if you speak it into existence and on, like basically all our senses and our very existence emits the energy that he speaks of. But the way he talks about it is like, we're not doing it right now. We need to get to a place where everybody's doing it. And I'm like, everybody's already doing it. By virtue of having created their own body and their own eyes, people have already pinched plasma together to create the most crazy object imaginable, the human eye. And everybody, good or bad, the good guys and the bad guys. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Are you getting my vibe, buddy? It's like, I love, like, he's such a cool cat. Like, I can't deny that Dan Winter is like one of the coolest cats imaginable, but something about it, like, maybe he's just so far ahead of thinking about it that he just doesn't want to engage on that level. But I definitely feel like he yada yadas a bunch of stuff, even though, look, he may be right about the alien invasion of the Greys and the Dracos. I might be completely wrong about this, but hard to gauge, hard to trust. Renegade, you say that a lot. I love that. I'm a Grey. Grandma came from Scotland. I never understand that, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more, or probably I need to research what that means. Let's see. Yeah, Carolina says, why do you want to be immortal? I mean, maybe, like, of course, it's understandable to kind of want to think about being immortal. What would it be like to be immortal? But when it's really thought through, you realize that, you know, you could be immortal or you could not be immortal, but that's not really the point. The point is the moment of now. So if you still exist, then you exist. Until you don't exist, there's no point in worrying about it. Right? That's really the point. Talk about the principle of least action. If you want to get to the most zen, the most calm place, the center of the boundless, still energy, you have to think about it from that context. Like, of course, it would be fun to think about living forever. It would be fun about saying, like, I know, like, the moment when I die, I'm going to be ready to lucid dream and inject my consciousness into the cosmic array. I totally understand what implosion and neg entropy is, and I watched enough Dan Winter and slowed it down to, like, really grasp it. And so he's basically saying, if you don't get this, then you're screwed. So there's a little bit of the religious pedagogy in there. I don't know. I like him a lot, but it's a heady conversation that he had. What's up, Dagger Spells? Great to see you. Evening. Grey is a Scottish surname. Okay, I got it. I am a Grey. You know, Gandalf the Grey. I like the idea of Grey, but I just don't like the idea of, like, the Greys being this alien extraterrestrial species, or species that are not from Earth, that essentially infiltrated at a certain point in the last 100 years, and they've been responsible for what is essentially human behavior. I just don't see the need for the alien part of this. I don't know why. Mario knows it's God. What's going on? Says there's an immortal life. It's just not this one. I'm not sure what that means, but this is the immortal life. It's just that the experience of being human is something that really only should last a certain period of time. It kind of is such a beautiful composition in and of itself. You have a certain life cycle of things, and then you experience things differently in the next life cycle. We already are in the immortal life. I mean, think about it. You have 3 points along a timeline. You have non-existence, and then you have existence, and then you have definite non-existence. So, but no one really asked the question as to where were you, or who were you before you were born? If you think you're so attached to the ego, to the self, then who was the self? Who were you before you were born? and a lot of people will give you the past life stuff, but just in physical reality, along your timeline, there was no you, there was a you, or there is a you, and there will be no you again, and therefore, very likely there will be another you, or another I, or A, E, I, O, U, from tomb to womb, from womb to tomb to womb. Yeah, and I think, I don't think you, so just to wrap up the kind of Dan Winter stuff for a moment, and then let's zoom in on Jupiter and see what's going on. But he talks about implosion or returning into the cosmic array, and I imagine that, like, not every death is the same, but I also imagine that returning to the cosmic array is almost unavoidable, like the dissipation of energy from the human body back into the etheric field, because the etheric field is already fundamentally that geometry that we see. Therefore, when we return to that field, everyone is going to do it. It's like almost this equalizer where everyone dies. Like, there's nobody special in that case. What's going on, Officer of Art? Officer of Art. Just standing at the back of my home, looking up at Jupiter, enjoying a nice cup of coffee. That sounds rad. I'm having a dragon fruit smoothie, or what's left of it. And yeah, so I talked about putting up some labels on Jupes. Let's do that before I forget. Yeah, so let me know if you've seen that video, Dan Winter and so the Jay Widener stuff talking about Gaia and people like Corey Good and stuff like that. That's a whole other thing. Probably why I feel so soured by the whole ufology kind of scene, because it just kind of went really nowhere, and then you started getting people jumping on the bandwagon who had really nothing good to add. So Ganymede, Callisto, Io, Europa. So what's this? Huh. Oh, video capture device is not there. There we go. Oh, there's my time thing. So I wasn't able to figure out this issue with the date and time in the bottom left corner. It says 16/10/2022, and I couldn't find change the sequence of date and day and month, so it's very weird, but that's how it goes. So Io, let's move these around. Jupy. So Jupiter right there. Got Europa up here at the top, Callisto up here. There we go. Nice and organized. Let's see, Esoteric Gold says, healthier I get, the more energy I have mentally and physically. Therefore, quest for immortality is more of simply a desire to get more out of life while I'm here. But you know what I'm saying about getting more out of life is a quest, but the meaning of life, if you're talking about the golden derivative of life, is that even if you've had one good experience, that's enough. You know, I'm not saying that I don't go after great experiences constantly. So the quest for immortality is just more like, I think the way I describe it is that I've described things the same way before. There are a lot of certain types of things in our society that have this seductive nature to them, but it's because you don't think through the ultimate kind of ramifications of those ideas. One of them being, what would it like to live forever, and others not. So dealing with everybody around you dying and never maintaining friends and seeing that type of energy, let's say, maybe death is not negative energy, but that type of depression and sadness of those cycles, would you really want to be able, like, how would you undo immortality? Or would you just choose to kind of not be immortal at some point? So, but bettering oneself, again, is a quest in not futility, but there's almost this idea of working on the self. So the person who's not good enough is kind of does the work to make oneself better. Alan Watts says it beautifully, but the one doing the work to make you better is the one that's not better yet. So how can you actually better yourself? I know that doesn't really resonate with everybody, because some people say, no, I can definitely better myself. But in a way, it's an illusion. Let's see. Mario Knows It's God says, has anyone taken a look at the Nos Confunden map? It's pretty interesting to think that the planets in our solar system are other suns and moons for other worlds. I'm not sure what that means, actually. No, it's fine, but I'm not sure what that is. Speaking of where things come from, we can talk about where Jupiter came from, and the fact that we have pretty much only about 2 theories out there about where Jupiter might have come from. Mainstream cosmology thinks that Jupiter clumped together from the remaining materials of our star, the Sun. And Jeffrey Walensky's stellar metamorphosis theory says that Jupiter is actually a star in a certain level, at a certain age in its life cycle, and now it's a brown dwarf. And ultimately it will keep evolving and changing and becoming something else over time. And it seems like we'd have a lot more, but we don't. We only have these 2 theories right now. And I see, gosh, I can't actually pronounce that name, but welcome Krachak? I can't really say that. But what's going on? So yeah, Renegade says living forever is hell. I mean, also that's kind of speculative. Maybe some people who had immortality could milk it per se and actually enjoy immortality. So it's not to say like no one would enjoy being immortal, but generally speaking, the kind of life, a roll of the dice that we have is a kind of generalization thing. So the majority of people at immortality would probably hate it, it seems. So that's why nobody has immortality. Like, death actually is something that helps us experience life in good chunks. Okay, so let's get rid of these labels here. Get rid of all the labels. I'm gonna put on a song and zoom into Jupiter. Let's see what's going on. get off. Sick of if you wanna live. Get us on holiday. You never know what's in the skies today. Oh, what's in the air? No love, nothing you can see. No nothing you can be. What's in the air today? Alright, hopping back in here. I was just trying to find the right focus, but it's not excellent seeing, I gotta say. Tonight's a little bit wonky. The tracking is not bad. You can see to the left, bottom left corner, you got Callisto and Io. But yeah, let's see if it settles a bit more. I see Mary in the chat. What's going on, Mary? Nice to see you. See XRP Hitman. What's happening? And just gonna go from, just rewind a little bit and read Esoteric's comment. Esoteric says, the ancient Sumerian kings list had kings ruling for as much as 23,000 years. You have to open your mind to the thought that advanced civilizations may live for hundreds of thousands of years. So, you know, like how you're telling me to open my mind, I'm absolutely happy to say that, yeah, why not? It's maybe possible that certain people or certain civilizations, even entire races of people, lived for that long. You know, maybe it's possible. Okay, so I'm sorry I can't pronounce your name, but I'll call you CH. CH says, so tell me what's at the North Pole, a mountain or a hole? So if you look at the poles, because Earth is a combination of water, ice, and land, you probably have a place where you can probably go in. There are probably sinkholes at the poles where you can fly under or cave dive into, like Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth, like the Admiral Byrd stories. I would imagine that militaries have gone there and have co-opted these spaces. Is it like a cosmic wormhole that looks like stars and wavy atmospheric effects? It could, possibly, who knows? Does it have a projector to project the entire night sky for the entire Earth for everybody for eternity? I don't think so. I don't think anyone built that projector. There's just, it's more trouble than it's worth. And then I imagine that there's probably a lot of interesting stuff at the North and South Pole on Earth. I just don't think I know exactly what it is, but I would imagine that it's natural and also human-made. And so what else? There's another thing you had. So what is the Aurora Borealis? So the Aurora Borealis is actually something that recently I started to absolutely understand what one of the theories is, and the fact that you have electrical filaments going in through the top of, like if we're looking at it right here. Let's scribble a little bit and I'll explain what these plasma sheaths are. But I was going to say about the living forever, it kind of poses the same problems every time, right? It's a little bit like, does everybody live for 10,000 years, or does one person, and this person who lives for thousands of years, does he keep recycling? Do they not get, there's a motivation crisis, there's a depression crisis, there's a potential, like, what is immortality embodied? Does it mean like you are impervious to dying, therefore you can still experience pain? What is aging? You know what I mean? It brings up much larger questions about what would happen to the human body and what other parameters you would have to change to accommodate the ideal immortality concept. It's more, that's what I mean when you start to really rationalize and think about what immortality really means. You have to dissect it, and you have to fraction it up and figure out like what part of it and what conditions and what would happen and who and when. And then maybe you could come up with a scenario where somebody could live for 10,000 years and it would be worth it. But overall, if you imagine it from our vantage point, about 50 to 70 years is probably enough to have all the experiences a bunch of times over, and then reset as a whole other system, like as a horse or fifth dimensional being, you know. Let's see. Yeah, let's see. Just reading a bunch of stuff here. I see Miguel hopping into the chat. What's going on? Howdy, howdy. Mary says, aging. Ugh. Carolina says, I can't picture myself living an eternity. I think, again, you know, it comes, if you say I'm immortal, does the body age at all? Right? Or does the body age and you have to live that long? Or can you feel pain? Or you can't die, but you can feel pain? Or you can't feel pain ever, therefore you couldn't feel pleasure? I think it always brings you back to the fact that the system that we live in right now is the most harmonically balanced for life, in a weird way, even though everybody wants the next possible thing or more. It's always the grass is greener idea, but we already have what perfection, even with all the bad stuff. That's kind of the point. XRP makes a good point about maybe a year could have been shorter. I agree with this. There's a whole other thing about the way we perceive time and the way we use rulers to measure time. And in this case, basically saying a year that we experience today is the same year all the way back 150 million years, for example. So potentially, depending on whether Earth was a star, which I think it was, and some other people do, like Jeffrey Walensky. So if Earth was a star, we're not sure, you know, exactly what a year is or was 100 million years ago or a billion years ago, or even 1,000 years ago, because it's based on our current position in the solar system and where the sun is and the spin rate of Earth. There are so many factors that factor into measuring a second or the basic, and what time is, as time is intervals between events. And events, if we measure them as bubbles, information bubbles around a system, then time is the space between these bubbles. So literally, as we create events, we create layers of time. That's how we can go back in time and remember concepts that we've stored in the ether around us as a layer. And the older the memory, the further away from the host antenna system it is, and therefore it's harder to remember things that are much further out in the shell. And that's why yesterday is much closer to you physically, so you can resonate with it much more quickly and remember all the things from yesterday. Let's see. Got real hot all of a sudden. So no red storm tonight, but what we can talk about and what I can scribble on Jupiter is something very important. So I went and studied the contemporary takes on Jupiter from Electric Universe vantage point, from NASA vantage point, from mainstream articles, from panels, from the ESA and global space agencies, and what everyone thinks of Jupiter right now. And it's interesting because not a lot of people have come to any conclusions actually about Jupiter, really. So there was this idea that at some point, because they could measure the magnetic field of Jupiter, or agencies or scientists can measure the magnetic field of Jupiter, and it's so large, that it had to have a core, a liquid metallic, and actually nickel iron core, just like Earth. But in fact, they tried to measure the core of Jupiter, and right now, the closest they can get to measuring it is this kind of fuzzy liquid metallic hydrogen core, and then further than that, an even slightly denser version of liquid metallic hydrogen. But it's really not a formed, like, actual core. So where the giant magnetic field of Jupiter comes from sort of poses a mystery, I would say, at least in the mainstream, or at least the way it's presented. And deniers of alternative physics are just completely blind to this. They don't even consider what's going on. But the fact that Jupiter has the second most powerful magnetic field in our solar system is important and relevant. And why it has a magnetic field without a solid core that can be measured is also relevant. So that's one aspect of it, and the reason it has a magnetic field and it has the kind of power to do so is because it's actually powered from the outside. It's powered from the outside via Birkeland currents, or electrical filaments, or strings, or whatever you want to call them. but I'm gonna get my, what's up, Fiat Punta plasma core. CH says, so it's important how deeper your consciousness goes. So I would say let's get to a point of experimentation, right? So as far as the experiments have taken consciousness, you ultimately get to a fabric of reality that's nested little dots. And when I say nested, it's like honeycomb. They're little circles, little spheres, and it's like a whole fabric of reality where these are the tiniest quantum bits or atoms. And then if you go further, it's pure vibration. You know, but you could probably go even further and find particles again at some point if you could go further. And then in space, we see the same sort of thing. So from our vantage point, things extend infinitely in both directions. And as far as we can tell, we get to a place of a singularity of consciousness, so therefore a boundless sea of infinite consciousness, of stillness, not a duality, but a singularity of consciousness, is what science says right now. And then special relativity and Big Bang cosmology says, no, space is different though. Space is very big, but it runs by different properties. But quantum mechanics has done the tests, and the tests show that this is what happens. And therefore, why wouldn't it happen on the cosmological scale? Because everything that makes up the planets is the same stuff. And so therefore, the same stuff, the singularity, boundless consciousness, that's where everything arises from. So humans, desks, chairs, telescopes, planets, comes from pure intelligence, or the soup of intelligence. How it comes from it, it's basically these, not basically, but it's very complexly or extravagantly. I'm just going to pull up my scribbling tool real quick. Mr. Guy says, Queen Amidala is beautiful in Star Wars. That's so funny. What's up, Mr. Guy? Okay, so paint program. Okay, now I can scribble. So the idea is that every object, so if you imagine that Jupiter is the nucleus of an atom, and if you think that humans, that like the heart, right, is like the nucleus of an atom, is like Jupiter, then around this shape, well, first, what powers and makes this shape is an electrical current, a twisting coaxial electric current. Same thing with Jupiter. These are much more complex than what I'm drawing, but of course this is what actually is going on. That's why things are connected from the outside. So that's the first layer. The second layer is that what's really going on is that around these wires that are going through space, which that boundless unified field of consciousness is made of these wires. Some of these wires end up getting closer and entangled, and at the point where these wires entangle and you create a node, a Z-pinch, that's what these are. Your heart, an atom nucleus, and a planet. And so what happens, sorry, I'm a little distracted. Just because the drift. Okay, bring it back here. Yeah, so the electrical filament going through has these things called a sheath, a plasma sheath. And these sheaths look like this from the side. If you look at it from a zoomed out perspective, it's really that. It's this donut or butterfly shape, which is a two-dimensional cross-section of a torus. And the intersection of a torus is a thing called a hypotrochoid, or pinched plasma tube. Right at the center, it's pinched because of the Z-pinch, and therefore the tightest point of this cylinder, or this tube, ends up pulling inwards. Let me bring it out here. And the shape of this apple, or the shape of this torus or donut, is the field. So that's what the magnetic field of Jupiter outlines, the same sort of thing. Now, as the field enters and the imprint of these sheaths upon the planet at the hottest points is the aurora. So the aurora on Earth, Saturn, Jupiter, and on, all these planets that are electrically active. The moon, you don't see this on the moon because the moon is no longer electrically active, at least not nearly as active as what we're looking at on Jupiter. So not only are the aurora like that, but out of the top of our heads as people, or from our heart to our stomach, you have these same cylinders, and you have the same tori, or donuts of energy around the heart. That's how the heart thinks. The heart resonates with its field, and that's how the heart can think. It's also how your stomach, which is also a plasma knot, can also think. That's how the brain has a stomach. And a brain, B-R-A-N-E or B-R-A-I-N, membrane, memory brain, is almost perfectly in line with this. So you create these memories from your heart, from your stomach, from your throat chakra, from your third eye chakra. So we are the 9 donuts in a stack. So we're a wormhole. This is the other big thing that I've been talking about. So the huge discovery that for me, people might find this pretty obvious, but there's this whole idea of like, what is a wormhole? Why do they always beat us over the head with this Einstein-Rosen bridge? What are quantum tubules, microtubules, all this stuff. And also, what are strings? So if we're talking about lightning, and we're talking about filaments, so lightning is a string. And this lightning is not a single connection of dots, it's actually a braided filament. And along the braided filament, you have these nodes. These nodes are what we see as atoms, human chakras. Human chakras are a series of these nodes. Planets are a singular node. And so, what else do we have? So these sheaths, not only are they nested, but if you looked at them, you'd see that they were counter-rotating. So each layer, or each layer of sheath over here, is rotating one way, the other way, one way, the other way. And that's why the bands of Jupiter rotate this way, and that way, and this way, and that way. It's got to be. It makes so much more sense like this, because each and every wiggle going through has its own rotation, and you have braided filaments like DNA braided filaments going through, and therefore you're creating counter-rotation with the very torsion of the strings, the cosmic strings, or the electrical filaments. Every filament has a sheath. The sheaths are counter-rotating cylinders, but these cylinders at very tight pinches end up looking hexagonal. And so that's why you get hexagonal nesting. And what it is, it's not just a singular wire coming into the top of our heads or an atom or Jupiter. It's multiple Birkeland electrical currents, and that's why you have these tornadic vortexial shapes at Jupiter, where you have like a rose-shaped pattern with a giant tornado in the center and then multiples outlined in a hexagonal formation around it, because you're looking at a cross-section of an electrical wire. Ellie Wynn, what's going on? I see you in the chat. Hope you're doing great tonight. Let's see. Yeah, so this is some thoughts on Jupiter. I imagine that the bands of Jupiter are also arranged based on electrical potential, and that's why if Jupiter's hydrogen, helium, and methane on the outer layers, as you go deeper, it becomes liquid metallic hydrogen, and then it gets deeper and you get a little bit more solid matter. And so Jupiter is essentially forming a core right now, and it's got probably a tiny core the size of an Earth. And then if you imagine stellar metamorphosis, you go from Jupiter into something like a Saturn, where it's lost a ton of its atmosphere. Maybe it explodes, it ruptures, and that's where all the matter comes from, is the disk of Saturn. So Saturn is like Jupiter, but more complex and smaller, and they're both their own little mini solar systems right now. So we can look at that and see the different progression of stars turning into planets in our own solar system. people who deny this or deny the discussion of this are just like really just not fun at all. This is one of the funnest times of science. Is that even English? It's one of the more fun times in science when we can really discover the connected universe and how electricity governs each and every interaction we have. But we are also the embodiment of the fundamental consciousness and the electricity, and therefore there is no super being above us or that is ex-human, you know, outside of the human experience. Genghis Khan, good weekend to the TBS tribe. Is it weekend? Aren't we? Yeah, it is actually. It's like, I'm sure it was Monday. No, but it is Sunday still. So yeah, we have an explanation for the bands of Jupiter. We understand why counter-rotating bands of Jupiter exist. We understand why there are tornadoes that are nested wires at the poles of Jupiter. Also, the Great Red Storm is an electrical wire going into Jupiter perpendicularly. And yeah, all storms ultimately outline a braided filament, which is why the storms at the poles of Jupiter and Saturn don't dissipate for thousands of years. CH says our digestive system is a different living organism in us with its own desires. I mean, it could be that, but it could also be part of us as just also having its own ecosystem and membrane which it interacts with, but it also is part of a whole system. I think we've been conditioned to believe that we don't understand the human body. It's like something outside of ourselves, but it's actually literally us plus the outside of ourselves that makes up the whole. All right, I'm gonna get a drink here because it's freaking hot all of a sudden, like it always is. Get down with the jam here. Not so far.
Ooh, I saw you on the train. It's 9 o'clock. Deep down, I thought you were so indestructible, with perfect beauty underneath. I was driven to slightly smile and lie by your feet. Stability is rocking the youngest, but I know it was the same. 'Cause you burn for me like I burn for you. You crave for me like I crave for you. So doctor, come quick now, deliver my rhythm. You're slamming my pavement, philosophy graveyard. I fly to the comet, collapsing like starburst. Catastrophe's hidden now that we're both in it. All you have to say yourselves. Some lacking up, what mystery or love? In between the record, I found light had turned to dust. Rockets on the beach, oh, when you just went to leave. I believe what's told, our story carries out. Your breath is so inspiring. Oh, it's nothing like you thought it though. There's nothing left to prove. All this love we find, falling into face with you. Long enough, but I'm gonna lose my mind. Cleared out the evidence, uncover the shock this time. Lightning is a fire. Say you to love for so long. Like my desert fire, fire. Lights in the distance, I walk slowly up the stairs. See ahead a lion sit alone upon his bed. Oh, fragile beast, I know it's been so long. What time is it? Time is it? I know I will cast sight of it, so like the mind and scattered soul, I let it go. Sigh like I'm reaching out. I left my home for 7 miles. We trail along for 7 lives. Let the whole heart sing. We're coming to shock this time. The light does it fire. Say you. There's a fire. There's a fire. There's a fire. There's a fire. Say you burn like there's a fire. There's a fire.
Alright, that was a couple of new tracks over there. Desert Fire, Not So Far, and Burn. So yeah, did a little scribble. I know you noticed it. That's just connecting just the moons that we see. So the 4 Galilean moons, Callisto, Io, Europa, and Ganymede, to Jupiter along their electromagnetic current lines or their field lines. And you see it almost immediately outlines the torus and the nested hypotrochoid or hourglass or pinched plasma tube. And there has to be a reason for this, and it is also very important that that is the fundamental shape that we see throughout. And the reason it's like that is because you have this helical, braided, imagine lightning as DNA, or DNA really outlining the same exact helical coaxial Birkeland current or electrical current. And around the current, you have these sheaths, these counter-rotating cylinders, which get more and more dense as you get closer to the wire. Imagine the wires that we have in our houses. Again, don't cut these wires and be careful with electricity. But if you see the cross-section of a lightning bolt, this is the same sort of thing that we see, and therefore, if you imagine intense lightning being attached to a surface for a long period of time, we actually might end up with these lunar craters that we're talking about, where, of course, some people think it's impact related, but if you do imagine that it's arc welded and you have this intense electrical arc from Earth, star, to the moon, then maybe you get a Copernicus, which is rising up from the ground, almost outlining the Birkeland current sheaths. And you get the central peak after this electric filament has died off after 5 days or 500 days or 5,000 years. And that's how you have that remnant peak at the center of these giant craters. Same thing with the corner of Aristarchus crater. Aristarchus Plateau, the Aristarchus crater being that intense bright white spot. We don't know, maybe that was a connected plasma filament, and now that we know the shape of the plasma filament is hexagonal nesting or counter-rotational rings. These counter-rotational rings appear, if we need proof, we can look at all the aurora borealis of Earth, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and probably in the laboratory we see this too. But I haven't found the data. What's happening, Rezovsky? Howdy, howdy. Heading home on a pogo stick. That's pretty good. Thanks so much, buddy. I appreciate that. Shout out, Mom. Hope everybody's moms and dads are doing well, and siblings, brothers and sisters. All right, pistachios daily. Exactly. Pistachios are super underrated. You can do a lot with them. You can crush them, bake them, boil them, put them into bread. You can toast them, salt them, eat them with an egg. Let's see. So let's go with another new-ish track here. Is this the one that I want to play? That one I'm saving. Saving a couple of new ones for some time in the future, for the next full moon. Let's play, I don't know, should I play something or should I talk more? I was just finishing up about the shape of things on Jupiter and how things are connected. So Jupiter must have these field-aligned currents connected to all the moons around it. So as a solar system, we can observe Jupiter and look at what our solar system with the sun looks like, but with Jupiter. That's one huge thing. We can also look at these storms. I think I actually have these images here. Where are these images? I think I actually saved something. Although, slideshow, is that what it is? Oh yeah. So yeah, I mentioned this yesterday, but the whole idea of the wormhole and strings being electrical currents. Buddy, did you hear what I was talking about in terms of this idea that wormholes are nothing but, not nothing but are actually these pinched cylinders or basically Birkeland sheaths. So Einstein's wormholes, his Einstein-Rosen bridge, are actually real, right? And then it's also akin to microtubules in quantum mechanics because they observe those. Therefore, basically just sheaths around electrical filaments just exist, and they're counter-rotating. And they look like the hourglass hypotrochoid, counterspace of a donut, pinched plasma tube. Let me know what you think of that. And also that string theory is really referencing filaments. So there's that. But I wanted to show the storms on Jupiter. I'm just trying to find this image here real quick. Okay, so here's an image, and hopefully it's okay that I show this as somebody else's image for education only. If you have any thoughts on what I've been talking about, buddy, let me know if you heard my question, and really appreciate you talking to Dan Winter about stuff. I mean, look, he really does know what he's talking about in a lot of ways. Just a quick note on that, because I was reminded, I didn't talk about the lunar wave yet, but so a lot of you did read the description of the video, so thank you, and thanks for all your opinions on it. I still have to go through a bunch of them, but some people didn't read the description at all, and told me about the Jupiter wave. And anyway, so the point is, we see the wave happen, or the event, or the effect happen across the sky. And it's really, I think it's irrelevant what the object is at this point. Clearly, if it's been done on Saturn, Jupiter, and the moon, it's not localized to the moon. So it's localized to the sky in some way. And I imagine that, anyway, so to cut a long story short, today when I was studying Pico Hank's videos on lightning, he references this, this discovery that they found that lightning emits shock waves in the upper atmosphere, or it depends on really where it is, but it can emit shock waves like breaking the sound barrier. And so when I was looking up bullet wake and sound barrier breaking and essentially nuclear weapons filmed with a camera, you see these types of lines ripple across the screen, and you could be confused and think, oh, that's the energetic effect on the camera. But cameras don't operate like that anymore. People who tell me that it's the camera stuff, cameras don't scan, don't work on scan lines anymore, so there's no scan line that can move across the frame. So it's the camera picking up an event in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere can scan line because it can compress along filaments, and these filaments go along double layers, and double layers expand like bubbles across the sky, and they expand like cylinders across the sky that outline the Birkeland current. So the Birkeland current of the sonic boom can expand, and that's what we see crossing the moon. And it's a very thin line that is compressed the material or in the sky, the dust and the ice crystals in the sky, to such a degree that it looks like a prism almost, moving across, like a scanner glass bar moving across the moon. And it's a really cool effect, but anyway, and it seems the most reasonable that it's actually high altitude lightning more than anything else. What's going on, Cameron Paul 2012? What's up? Carolina says, I remember those days when Crow Trip 7 was like making the weirdest analysis of the moon waves. To be fair, not even to be fair, you know where I come down on that, because for me it's definitely not a projection moon. Space is not projected. It's less logical that space is projected than it's not. But since the moon is a real object, it seems, I don't know, there was just this fever around the time. I mean, there's still some of that fever, but this idea that we live in a Truman Show with a projected sky. And when you really just rationalize that, it's a little bit like the immortality stuff. Like, it would take so much effort to run this machine to make it consistent that it's almost better to let the slaves on Earth see the whole sky for real, because it doesn't really matter when you're enslaved, at least metaphorically or maybe physically. But do you know what I'm saying? Like, the whole idea that our sky is fake just makes less sense than if it were just real, because we can't get to it anyway, right? So it makes more sense that it's real, because it's as consistent, it feels real. It doesn't feel like a made-up sky. So anyway, the weird theories that were being generated were just, it wasn't that many. It was literally that because they were projecting the moon had scan lines going through it, like refreshing the scan of the moon. And while it sounds very cool and sci-fi, I just feel like it's so unreasonably difficult to make that happen for the whole world, whatever the shape the world is, even though it's round. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, projecting something like that, maintaining a device like that could project all of the sky and the clouds and everything, way more trouble than it's worth. So anyway, you see it. There are so many, I'm not going to go into that topic, but that's the idea. Pico's Hank is a really good channel, like some of the best lightning footage imaginable. But he also, it's interesting because he has a whole documentary on like, what is lightning and all this stuff. And then at the end, he kind of goes into the red sprites, right, which are the kind of bigger filaments that are above the clouds. And you start to realize how it's not just the lightning that we see coming to the ground from the clouds, but it's these bundled and thicker and huge and denser lightning layers that are above Earth. And so if you think about the Kármán line, you think about orbits, you think about the layers around Earth, you start to realize there's far more complexity in it, but in a simpler way, that it's lightning all the way up and down. Almost like... And the same reason, then you can imagine that around the human body, you have these small filaments that outline the hairs of the body, and then you have bigger filaments outside that, bigger filaments outside that, and then when we connect with each other, it's a lot like the lightning reaching out. We send out a lightning bolt, and we send it out perpendicular to the longitudinal wave, or to the vertical lightning bolt that goes into space, into our heads, into the ground. So we send out from these funnels, from our heart chakra, our mouth, our eyes, we send out these signals along fields, along electrical filaments into the field. And that's what, when you're looking at Earth interacting with the cloud, the Earth is actually sending out little signals trying to capture or trying to connect or turn these arcs into glow mode. I hope I explained that correctly, but it's fairly easy when you look at it. Yeah, Kirlian waves, or Kirlian photography, right? Or electroplate. Kirlian is kind of a fancy word, but if you put your hand on an electroplate and you take a photo, you'll see all these little filaments coming off of it, and it looks just like the red sprite bundles that we see, and there are even more, right? It keeps going up and up and up into space, and that's how Earth is fed by space all around it. but also the vast majority of it is from the poles. Buddy says, "You're my favorite. You're the best at explaining this in layman's terms. You're too kind, man. Really. Thank you. It's so cool to have you here, somebody who I really respect, and I mean, I respect all of you, but Buddy doing those videos on Thunderbolts, that stuff is like a lot of the stuff that I want to say, a lot of the, you put together a ton of the images that show the kind of relationship between the things. It's just awesome. Just so awesome. Those sexy rabbit holes. Okay, the filaments that radiate, so our hair, right? Our hair outlines the filaments. Our pee, when we pee, your pee spirals. Why does it spiral? It's a huge, I think it's a really big deal. Like, I don't know why we have these huge ventures into figuring out protein folding when people can't understand how the eye works. For example, like I was saying last night about infinity focus. What is this thing about looking into space? Where exactly is the cutoff point where everything compresses to a single node, to a single dot? So all of space comes to a point. But that's not really the case, right? Certain aspects of space come to a point where you're looking. But space is everywhere, right? So if we look up, you'll see all across the sky. So it's not like all of space comes to one tiny little point. But when you're pointing the scope, for example, at a star, this star is in focus, and it's supposed to be, you know, let's say 10 light years away. But you're looking at it next to the moon, which is much closer, 250,000 miles. And you have to just, and I mean, first of all, you're looking at it with the naked eye, therefore, without any telescopes, you're already kind of focusing in at a certain point, called the vanishing point or the far point. And science right now, like mainstream science, even advanced optic courses, the way they talk about it is they just say, listen, this is the phenomenon, everything parallel light paths focus into a point, and they start doing a lot of trigonometry, which is the math behind it. But I think it's more fundamental to imagine, like, why is this happening? So first, how the eye sends a signal, a low emission signal from the center of our eye into the field. And whatever it comes in contact with is what it starts to generate a collaborative relationship to create this instantiation, this magnetic moment, this photonic dipole. I've heard almost everybody talk this coupling, basically. So it's really, either wave interferometry, where one wave propagates and the other propagates at an angle to it, or at a 90-degree angle to it, and the merger of these two lasers or waves creates this foci. This foci is an instantiation of reality. But it could also, it's also moving and interacting with everything in our field. So we're interacting with phones that have a field, and a computer and a scope, and the radiation from space, and so many different things are overlapping. And I think especially like Buddy being here, Buddy has shown it in diagrams in a way that the way I see it in my head, these overlapping, nested, recursive, fractal donuts and hypotrochoids or tubes, pinched plasma tubes along vast filaments. This is the matter that we see. And everything outside of that is the antimatter or the counter space. And reality as a whole is the combination of field of antimatter and matter, dark matter and matter, luminous matter and dark matter, plasma and glow mode or dark mode. So many different terms, again, that kind of describe the same fundamental situation that we find ourselves in, is the matter that vibrates in the world is so much less than all the matter out there, but you need all the matter out there in order to see the tiny bit of luminous matter. This is the great relationship that is fully on display when you cut open an apple and you see the relationship between the seeds and the flesh, the seeds having this incredible amount of information, and the flesh being delicious, and you needing both of them to propagate an apple, because if you had only seeds, no one would eat the apple, and if you had only flesh, you'd have no information for the next tree. And therefore, you have this relationship of 10 to 90%, 10% to 90%, or 1 in 100, or any type of relationship you want to look at it as, but you can see that you have a compressed amount of information at the center, and you have a field amount of information around it. and the skin of an apple is now the furthest away, and it was the closest at the beginning. Therefore, our birth memory, our skin, is far out from us, like 15, 20, 30 feet maybe. And that's why we can't really reassemble the memory of our birth. But if you imagine that closer to our core, we store memories constantly in our closer near-term field. And this is the idea of the extended mind, where if you take Rupert Sheldrake Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenic field, morphic resonance, you take that further and you connect everything. I mean, not to insult him in any way, of course, like he's been talking about it for 40 years, really way ahead of everybody on this. So the field is pretty much everything at this point. And now I've lost the train. So rods and cones are tuning forks. That's a great comment, Renegade. Sympathetic resonance, right? A star just blinked bright. Did anyone see that? That happens because of, well, it could have been a meteor or a satellite. Actually, I caught an interesting satellite transit earlier in this video, like the first 2 minutes. I'll link to it, but remember to come back and check it. It was very cool, and I think it might have actually been the ISS. I haven't gone back and checked, but it looked really good. Man, beer pig. My pug. Al Gore's rhythm. Lago rhythm. Yeah, I mean, again, YouTube, think about it. YouTube, there's a tiny sliver, the seeds, that are great, and the rest of YouTube is basically all this fluff, you know. You just got to dig in for the seeds. Let's see, Silent Murmur saying, I agree, I wonder why people don't tend to describe where the phenomenon comes from, what causes and conditions come together that they arise from. It seems that if it's understood, it can be described in plain language anyone can understand. Yeah, I think maybe you were here last night, right? I was talking about all the talk show hosts that have these big podcasts, and I was also in a way talking about Thunderbolts Project and see the pattern, and how not all the time, but they tend not to come to actual conclusions, like very simple conclusions. So even in the last video where Stuart Talbot's talking about the storms on Jupiter, he doesn't finish the video up with like this conclusion that says these storms are exactly like this because of a coaxial Birkeland filament outlined in Don Scott's model given here. I know he sort of does it, but it's not clear, you know what I mean? Or he doesn't have Don Scott himself just provide a 2-minute quote from his cell phone and say, hey, yeah, look at the storm on Jupiter. It's actually nested storms. Each storm is outlining the coaxial Birkeland current. Done. So either, you know, maybe they need a director of sorts, or they just need to like not worry about this 2-minute, 5-minute, 7-minute video thing that YouTube kind of creates, this idea that people are too ADD to really listen to anything of substance. Greg J is a good example that people are willing to just listen for hours and hours and hours and stick around if they're interested in a topic. There are tons of indie channels where like attention span is not an issue. Let's see. Yeah, so what I was saying about not drawing, it's really simplistically drawing conclusions, right? For example, like, I got to give it at least to Dan Winter, where he's saying, look, my goal here is to provide people with the information to be immortal and to have a good death. So whether or not I agree with him about aliens, like, he has a really great like motivational purpose and something that I can get behind. But when I think about, like, I guess some of the podcasts that I mentioned, I will not mention them too many times, but some of the big ones, they tend to have people on who are actually very smart, and they dance around controversial topics, but really they never go further, and they never actually stop. This is the big thing. they allow assumptions to go by, which the assumptions themselves could be flawed. And two, they allow the guest to go on their merry way and very rarely stop them and say, hey, could you clarify this one statistic? Or could you tell me how you reached that conclusion? Or could you tell me what data you're talking about specifically? And I'll give you an example, like when they talk about exoplanets. There are several measurements that you can get from an exoplanet, but it's not an infinite number of data points. And by saying things like, it's the data, it's the science, we've gathered so much science and so much data, I think that's actually very condescending to even just regular people, but especially to people who are trying to study science, because it gives the impression that there's this thing that you are just not adept, or you don't have the capacity to understand this science, so we're going to obfuscate it and just tell you the basic facts. But when it comes to exoplanet research, there are photos, but the photos are basically photos of stars, and everybody's seen photos of stars. Then there are spectrograph measurements, and everyone can go look what a spectrograph looks like. And there are electromagnetic radiation spectrums and radio waves. There are a few charts and few points of data that you can garner from every space mission. And I really don't think you need to know the makeup of rocks or like deep geology to just get a basic sense of like what the measurements are of things. And so when science says something like, it's a habitable Earth, you know, the TRAPPIST clusters, like exoplanets, Earths that are so Earth-like, is either intentionally massively misdirecting or massively silly, because who's stopping them from postulating this crazy idea, right? Like, so anyway, people could say the same about me, but the point is, when I read comments like that, I think about, well, what is the data? And so you get these podcasts, the same thing. They get these professionals on, and they don't say, hey, what did you mean by the speed of light in this instance? You know, because if you really pressed people, they'd have to come up with an answer, and that's actually really difficult. So when you're touring and writing books, it's very hard to actually keep abreast of all this information. But then again, they talk about it as if these things are completely settled, like, for example, the speed of light. Again, the speed of light, even if it is a law postulated by humans, and even if it were very consistent, it's very unlikely that the speed of light is a number that is always that exact same number. It just seems so irrational if you really think about it. It just seems like even if it's very consistent, it would wiggle. The speed of light probably changes a little bit all the time. And if we understand bigger and larger epochs and timelines, it's likely that the speed of light changes drastically over time. And it changes depending on where you are in space. And so the fact that we can't even have a discussion without people name-calling or just like being absolutely rude about it is kind of nuts. But I'm just saying it, because why not? Let's see. Let me read some stuff. Buddy says, love to do a side project where you and me interview these people and ask them the questions. Yeah, that would be freaking amazing, actually. Let's do it. I need to hit you up on Skype. I need to turn on that old computer. Like the Electric View computer that I put in storage, I need to just dig it out and like get back on. I know, because it would be cool. I mean, it's like, I don't know if you saw the Demystify Science podcast and David D. Hilster on Dissident Science, but those are the kind of cats that like I feel would help in also not spreading the message, but like just getting more, I don't know, more direct conclusions or drawing up conclusions. I don't know. I've seen some of the Demystifying Science stuff, and they get all the cool people. Like just everybody's on there, but every single one of them, I just feel like I want more. I want like them to ask more accurate questions, more important questions, and draw the conclusions on the show. There's no reason why we shouldn't be drawing conclusions at this point. Hurdy-gurdy, man, what's going down? How's it going? So Jupiter's disappeared. That's due to my windowsill at this point, so sorry for the black screen. I'm going to go and have some dinner shortly. So I'm just wrapping it up here with a few more questions. I'll actually put a recorded clip. Just give me a moment. Anything else to look at? It doesn't seem like it. Doo-doo-doo. All right, so pre-recorded clip here for a sec. Silent Murmur says, yes, it's helpful to ask clarifying questions like, what do you mean about that in this instance? I think it's one of my hugest pet peeves with mainstream, but also with alternative science. People don't stop each other and say, hey, like Dan Winter even, really brilliant guy, right? Stop him. Tell him, okay, what's the deal with immortality? Like, why do you want to achieve immortality? Do you mean real immortality, or do you mean immortality with restrictions, stuff like that, or the alien thing? Yo, Cybercelly, I see you. What's going on? The matter atmosphere that light is traveling through would affect the speed it travels at, I would suspect anyway. There's a great point. I don't know if you just are showing up, but I talked a bunch about the Dan Winter video earlier in the show, and I was just actually talking about it again here. But yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on it, like a big one being why Dan Winter is so hung up on the Dracos and the Greys, but he also really has a brilliant grasp on creating instantiations of reality. But he also doesn't talk about the contrast and the Zen aspect of it. But I guess he does talk about it because he's talking about meditation. It's really intertwined, listening to him and listening to the other cat who's always on the show with him. It's like how I felt about listening to Eric Dollard's work, or when I listened to Ken Wheeler's work. Like, it's hard to kind of, at some point they become, I don't want to say stagnant, but it's difficult. I don't know, it's difficult. Nobody's really sitting there saying, like, I guess what it is, and it's not saying that I don't have an ego. I'm sure I probably have an ego, but I'm really trying to look for the connections here. I'm really not trying to grow this channel and become a celebrity at all. Like, the total opposite. Like, I don't want any credit for any of the stuff that I'm saying, except the music, of course. But the stuff that I'm saying is just like missing knowledge from our knowledge base, you know? And I'm trying to put it together in the best way that I know how. So I never really care about models or who's right, who's wrong, who has more views, and I feel like almost every channel kind of gets back to that, like growing the channel, getting it bigger, dealing with people, and it ruins the science, or at least it ruins the kind of ability for them to go out and, I mean, especially kind of with Thunderbolts not being able to approach smaller channels. But again, I mean, I guess they got Gareth on See the Pattern, they got a bunch of smaller things. So I don't say it's all so black and white, really. Yeah, I talked about a bunch of it. Like I said, I think it's one of the better pieces of video, this Dan Winter and Jay Widener chat. Jay Widener is a really interesting character, and he actually gave me a little bit of information that I was missing about Gaia TV, because I think a lot of us in this area kind of came up on Gaia for a while back there. Like there were Suspicious Observers, there was Gaia TV for a few years from like 2012 to 2015-ish, and apparently Jay Widener is the one who was actually running programming and had a lot more control. If I'm being fair, like, this first stuff that turned me off of Gaia was David Wilcock in like his, I really loved David Wilcock for a long time, and I followed Stephen Greer for a long time and all these cats, and then at some point I started to realize, I'm like, this is not going anywhere, is it? And they're just waiting for some day where, like, a system that is never going to share what they know, they're like, nope, that's tomorrow. The system is definitely going to come out and tell us about it. And I'm so glad I moved away from that, because it still obviously hasn't happened, and it won't happen. The only way to know what the secret of energy is to just tell people what it is. Just the secret of energy. This is what it is. So I don't know. There's a lot of thoughts I had. I mean, it's interesting because there wasn't a vibe when Dan Winter talks about Elena Danaan and the Council of the Nine and Thoth. And I was just like, I think he deep down knows it's a little strange, because I don't think he has met aliens himself, and I don't think he has been teleported onto a ship. And I just feel like if he had been teleported onto a ship and had met extraterrestrials, like for sure, that Dan Winter is the kind of guy who would tell you exactly what he saw and he would decipher it. I mean, it would be a little bit convoluted, but he would probably tell you. And the fact that he leans so heavily on a circle of people who, at least, well, I'll tell you. I mean, if I go into a little bit of specifics, you tell me if I should not talk about this stuff in the chat. Is this type of shit you don't want to hear? But I don't know. I spent a lot of time researching it. But he says, I interviewed Demystify Science before when they were just doing puppets. Yeah, like, I really wish they'd redo the... Like, I love the puppets. It's very clever and creative, but I think they should really do a real interview with Pierre Marie. I feel he deserves more than the puppet avatars. To be fair, that episode is hard to watch, because Pierre Marie is like, man, he's like of a different stature, and they should have really prepared, and they kind of went all over the place. I have a lot of comments on that, but I'm glad they talked to him. Like, any type of exposure is good exposure for Pierre, for Dr. Pierre. Honestly, I could probably get your own Thunderbolts video. I'm telling you, I'm working on it. I've been kind of hinting at it, but I started writing. It's very difficult for me to put, I have a bunch of ADD. You probably hear it in my voice, but certain things like this, I can sit and chat for a long time, but actually sitting and writing like an outline and getting something done has become challenging over the years, just because I've lost the patience to sit and work on a computer for hours. So the times that I do spend on the computer are like reading some comments, studying, and then streaming, and then I tend to try and get off computers. In any case, no excuses. I appreciate the offer, and I think like I should probably put together this holistic theory of everything and connect all the dots, if nothing else than to shout out all the people in one video, which is sort of what I've been doing. So I've been creating a backlog of Eileen McCusick and Rupert Sheldrake, Eric Dollard, Halton Arp, like a little snippet about all of them in a photo. And then I'm going to talk about each of them a little bit and what they bring to the table. And then I started another thing, which is like a stupider thing, which is like 3 ways to tell that you're God. And it would be like a more like short snippet sections where you can do these either self-koan or self-realization experiments and achieve Zen in a much more realistic way than sitting in a monastery doing Zazen for 30 years, just giving people the secret right away. So we'll see. Maybe one day I'll get that together. Not maybe. One day I will get it together, and we'll see if I can edit it into something that is T-Bolts friendly. But thank you. I appreciate the support, of course. Again, it's really just doing the thing. I've produced a lot of content before, but coming at it from a perspective of saying like, hey, I want to put together this theory of everything. And everything is interconnected, right? So if I talk about the boundless conscious... Anyway, I'm working it out, so this is not a complaint. This is sort of me free thinking and explaining my process, but the process is explain the boundless field of consciousness, introduce examples, explain that before Big Bangs you have this unified field of consciousness, and show examples. And then after that, we show this percolating, this quantum foam, and organization versus coherence. And we figure out, okay, this is where the emergence of consciousness comes from. Resonance in terms of connectivity and how we have fields and what this all looks like. Then we talk about the geometry of it, and then go up the fractal order of magnitude scale and show that it happens at every scale and why. And then there has to be a section on the cultural relevance of it, like the idea that the Earth is thinking, panpsychism, bring in the Rupert Sheldrake biofield, Gerald Pollack electric body stuff, quantum health, electric health, sorry. And there has to be a section where we bring together quantum mechanics and special relativity once and for all, because there's just no reason electricity shouldn't govern space the same way it does the quantum world. Sonics and resonances, harmonics, sympathetic resonance, the shape of things, you know, so you can hear some of these ideas, and if like you're really trying to put it in a video, it's a little bit challenging. I mean, it's very challenging right now. So I am working on it ultimately, and we'll see. I've done this channel, so at least I have I've done something. I've said it. I don't go to bed thinking like, oh, there's just something I just missed. I think I've said everything. And that's I feel like the antithesis to the mainstream, or really pretty much any channel that is talking about science that is not alternative or electric universe right now, is just like, let me regurgitate the same nonsense over and over and bore a hole into your head. And I'm just saying, hey, here's a new idea, here's a new idea, here's a new idea. Let's think about this, let's think about that. No limits. You have beliefs, hold them, put them on the shelf. Let's think about this new thing. So yeah. All right, I think I might wrap it up for tonight. This has been a good show. Very good show. 1:46, an hour 46, I mean. 9:15 on the clock. I hope everybody has a super chill and electrically active, electrically vibrant Sunday Eve. I'll catch you on the next show. Maybe Jupiter again tomorrow or the day after, and maybe the moon in a few hours if I'm feeling frisky. Buddy and Ellie and Renegade and Silent Murmur and Fiat Punta and Cyber Sully, Astralis and Mary and who else? And Carolina and Mr. Guy, XRP Hitman, Silent Murmur, and who else we got? I'm only going to scroll. Genghis Khan. I'm going to only shout out whoever I can scroll to. I think that's it, right? We had CH. Couldn't pronounce your name, but thanks for your comments. And that's all I got. I hope you all have a great one. Let's take it out on Electric Blood. If you're catching this later, hope you're doing awesome. And this is your captain signing out. Another amazing space stream, Fringe of Reality. Let's get it. Stay brilliant, friends.
I've been waiting on the street for days. Don't treat me like a fool. I've been sleeping on the streets for days. Don't treat me so cruel. I've been waiting on the porch for days. Don't treat me like you're cool. I've been waiting on the sea for years. So long for you, I've been dreaming about the song. So long for you, I've been singing about the song. So long for you, I've been dreaming about the one with you, I've been singing about this dream. So long for you, till I see the color of your eyes reflected in the picture I made for you.